and welcome to our third webinar of TandEM, a project that is looking at empowering migrant youth in Europe. My name is Geertrui Lanneau and I work at the IOM here in Brussels, and I will be moderating today's webinar. We are going to look at a new promoting interfaith dialogue and mutual understanding, one of the key objectives of our TandEM project. And for that, we will have different speakers of different backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, different countries that participate in the project. But before we go to that, I will give you a very brief introduction to the TandEM project. So I will share my screen. Please let me know if you can see the PowerPoint presentation. Yes? Can you see the slides? Good. Can I please ask all participants to their mics? Thank you. So TandEM is a project that aims to empower migrant youth in Southern Europe and to build a bridge between migrant youth and local youth to promote dialogue. We are particularly focusing on higher education institutions, so universities. Of the project is really dedicated to encouraging young Southern Europeans to actively contribute to the integration of migrants through, for example, peer-to-peer student mentorship schemes, social media campaigns, and so forth. The project is funded by the European Union Asylum, Migration and Integration Fund, in short AMIF. It has a 2 years duration and it's implemented by IOM together with two partners, EUA, which is the European University Association, and I will present and lead the topic of inter-religious dialogue under this project. There are 6 countries involved: Croatia, Cyprus, Greece, Italy, Malta, and Spain. And there is a network of 11 universities across those countries that participate in the project. Now, why are we particularly working with universities? First of all, because we see education as one of the keys of inclusion. We also believe that we can foster the engagement of young students in promoting integration. Intercultural awareness are key values that universities promote, and these are also places where dialogue and communication of youth takes place and where interreligious understanding can be. Now, in total, there are 4 components under the TandEM project. The first one is a campaign that looks at how youth narrative on migration and demystify some of the stereotypes. That was actually the topic of our last webinar. A second component relates to mentorship in universities, which is implemented in Italy and Spain, where students are actually supporting the integration of other students with a migrant background in universities through a mentorship program. Then we have the component of interreligious dialogue, which is implemented in Italy, Malta, Spain, and Croatia. This is the topic of today's webinar, of course, and we'll hearing a bit more how this interreligious dialogue has been implemented so far, and what are the lessons learned. And finally, the country regional study on access to higher education for migrants and refugees, with recommendations on how we can promote more inclusive education. The rest of that's actually available, to presented in our first webinar. And course. So in case you have more questions on the TandEM project, feel free to contact the TandEM team and TandEM website. Good. So I think with this, we have text of the webinar, which is going to look at particularly this component of TandEM that promotes interfaith understanding. For me, this is one of the most interesting parts of the webinar and of also the project. It's something IOM has not engaged with in the past, so we are very eager to see how this evolved in the project and to continue promote interreligious difference. So we have a first set of who are going to look at the Italian context, and I actually have 3 speakers who are online. We have Don Andrea Messaggi, Director of the University Pastoral Care Diocese of Como. We have Yahya Pallavicini, who's the President of the Italian Islamic Religious Community. And we have Alessandro Lovisolo, who is part of the Union of Italian Jewish Youth. So I'm happy to introduce the first speaker, Don Andrea Messaggi. He's a Catholic priest. He's the director of the Union at Diocese of Como, where he's also a chaplain and a professor. So Don Andrea Messaggi, can you hear us? You can unmute yourself. Don Andrea, are you with us? Okay. Don Andrea is not online at the moment, so we will for now continue with the next speaker, and perhaps Don Andrea will join us later. Yahya Pallavicini. Yahya Pallavicini, he's a Muslim Italian citizen. He actually has a Japanese mother and Italian father, and he is president of the Italian COREIS, which is the Islamic religious community. He's Imam of Al-Wahid Mosque and he's an advisor on Islam at a national and international level. Amongst others, also he's a member of the European Council of Religious Leaders. Yahya, can you hear us? Can you unmute yourself?
I hear you well. Thank you very much for the introduction. Do you hear me?
Okay. Yes, we hear you very well. Welcome to the webinar.
Thank you. So shall I start with some guidelines and comments?
Yes, please go ahead and tell us a bit more about interreligious dialogue TandEM project.
Yes, it is a very important issue that through the cooperation with OIM we have been sharing in 5 universities, as you know, with very interesting outcomes from different faculties, juridical studies, sociological studies, cultural and historical approaches. And so this gave us the opportunity to show the complexity, but also the richness of diversities of different religious identities and communities. I think one of the main challenges is to understand and to manage the diversities of religious sensitivities and needs in the Western secular context. So you need, of course, a juridical solution, you need also a political solution, but in terms of education, the main thing is to work on a cultural level. So to increase the knowledge of each religious denomination and need in the context of contemporary society helps to have an inclusive approach, but also to open relations between generations, between cultures, between religious diversities, even East-West. So it's also helping the European citizenship, but also helping persons to be citizens of the world, respecting diversities and the specific religious sensitivities, avoiding any kind of abuse or instrumentalization in terms of ideological narrative or propaganda. So I think this was an inclusive, very important approach, and we think this is something that needs to be developed for migrants, for citizens, for new generations, for institutions as a core element of European identity in international relations and intercultural society.
Thank you very much. Could you tell us a bit more on how you concretely use this approach under the TandEM project? Because I understand that under your guidance, a number of interfaith dialogues took place in Italy, but also in other Southern European countries. What exactly was done, and how would you assess, let's say, the first results of this?
Well, concretely, it was involving 5 universities and different faculties in each university in order to have a interdisciplinary approach. As I mentioned, juridical studies or economic studies or sociological studies or historical studies, comparative religion studies, to find all the different connections in these different fields where the variety of religious identities and communities are part of our society and are part also of the situation of universities. And the other approach was to link between religious leaders and youth. To have confessional youth student organizations such as UGEI for the youth of the Jewish community, or the Federation of Catholic Students and Muslim Youth, trying to link with their senior leaders and also with other students and the youth at university. So it was also an intergenerational process. And we saw that linking these different situations, many prejudices would come out, many questions, many sensitivities would be expressed. And we found the way together to manage, if I may say, complexities, trying to show at a comparative level some solutions, but also to propose some issues that can be probably processed and developed in the next future. So at the end, there was a much more knowledge and a more natural way of cooperating.
Yes, thank you. That sounds very interesting, how you, let's say, linked the religious leaders with the youth. Now, you mentioned that there are a number of, let's say, prejudices or sensitivities that came out and that could be discussed in these dialogues. Would you have any examples of that?
Well, I think that some of the prejudices are linked to issues concerning either the misleading approach of Oriental cultures or of situations connected to violence or to nationalism or to political agendas and narratives, which are narrow-minded or aggressive in terms of intercultural cooperation. So, and of course, then you have also more detailed issues such as the woman statute or the family issue or the working permit or how a Muslim or a Hindu or a Buddhist can find his place as a believer in the context of contemporary society. So in a more wider approach, I think that the complexities would be how traditional new generation families find their ways in a modern society, how religious families find their way in a democratic secular society, and how to manage again secular and modernity and democracy for persons who were probably not so well trained in the values of this European environment.
Yes, yes. Okay. Thank you very much. I understand you also produced some guidelines, right, that could help colleagues of IOM and other organizations to take forward this interfaith dialogue. Could you tell us a bit more about these guidelines, and do you think, would you see it feasible, to continue such dialogue in the future?
Yes, well, the guidelines are actually really to find ways to somehow have an inter-institutional cooperation. We need to foster not to separate situations such as society or institutions.
Same for the other participants?
Oh.
Yes, now I can hear you again. I lost you one moment. Sorry.
So the idea is to link different approaches in society in an interdisciplinary way. Avoid what was probably a misconception in the past, where religion is something private and does not have any connection to institutions, to politics, or to society. I think that the idea is that a full citizenship is also something that takes into consideration also the sensitivity of a religious identity that has to be framed with respect to laws and to the rights of Western contemporary society. So somehow it's linking spirituality to responsibility without creating ghettos and without creating any ideological, radical, extremist interpretation. Really trying to help and facilitate a dialogue and a knowledge among different parts of society.
Okay. Thank you very much for sharing this. To all the participants that are online, in case you have any questions you would like to ask, feel free to use the chat function and we'll come back to that later. But perhaps now we could hear from Alessandro Lovisolo. Alessandro, are you already online?
Yes.
Yes, very good. I can hear you.
Okay.
Perhaps first to introduce Alessandro to the participants. So Alessandro Lovisolo is a member of the National Board of Jewish Youth, or the Italian Union of Jewish Youth. Is that correct,
Yes.
Alessandro? Yes, and I understand. Yes.
Yes, that I was in the council last year, but not this year. Now I am only a member, a normal member of the UGEI,
Okay.
the Union of Jewish in Italy.
Okay, so Alessandro is a member of the Jewish Youth Union of Italy, and he participated in the different TandEM seminars on interreligious dialogue. So Alessandro, would you like to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I would like to speak about my experience. That was a very good experience. I don't see you. Can you hear me?
That's fine, Alessandro.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Participants
Yeah.
to see you, so please go ahead. I still hear you.
Thank you. And it was an amazing experience because really go there in the university and then speak to a lot of students about us, about my religion, about all, and listen about all the religion. Increase incredible my culture, my mind, and I believe that also for all the students that come to this seminary in Milan, in Turin, in Venice. I believe that this was an amazing opportunity and a really good moment, and I believe that they learn something really in a deep way. And I say this because I saw in the face of the students that they really like and they really enjoy what they were doing. And I think that it is something that we have to repeat in the next years, because I believe that it's really the key to solve some problems that start maybe in the university, or not only in the university, or maybe in the school, in the high school too, of problem of diversity, problem of violence or discrimination, like the Imam Pallavicini said before. And in this moment, I believe that this moment is really, really important. Also because I think that this moment gives the opportunity to all the students that probably never see a Jew or a Muslim to ask, to see and to ask and to talk to different mentality, different culture, and different type of the society. And so I believe that this is a very good experience for me and for all the students and for all the tutors that participated to this seminary.
Thanks for sharing your experience. You said that you learned a lot. If you have to think of one thing that you learned through the dialogues, what would it be?
Probably to listen the different, and I believe that also the students of the university learn this ability to listen the different culture and to try to understand what means be a young Jewish or a young Muslim in Italy in 2019. And I believe that is the key of interreligious approach, is to listen and to try to understand the different culture and the different ethnics and everything.
Yeah, you're right. Listening is, of course, the first step to come to also, understanding each other and appreciating each other despite the differences. So thank you for sharing that. Now, let's say moving on to the future, how do you see possibilities to continue this type of interreligious dialogue? And at the same time, in your view, what would be some of the obstacles, let's say, to interfaith dialogue?
I believe that for the future, we have to increase this type of dialogues. But I think that not only in the university, that of course is an amazing opportunity, and you can speak and dialogue with young, but not really young people, students and person. But I believe that we have to increase and spread this activity also in like high school, because I believe that problems start before, start in high school, start during childhood, during this situation. And I really think that the kids, the child, have not this type of problem of differently or racism or discrimination. But in the high school you see this type of problems. So if we start to work and start to teach in a very early moment of the life during the childhood, we can solve this problem at the beginning. So it was amazing. And I really think that education and culture is really important. So the school, the university is the key for all this process. And the second question, sorry, I don't remember the second question.
Yes, if you see any difficulties, any challenges or obstacles towards this interfaith dialogue.
Yes, of course, there are something, but I believe that it's not an incredible obstacle. I think that the most important obstacle is that maybe the people like me, like the young people, are not active, and are not in this situation, and they don't participate to this dialogue and everything. I think that this is the only obstacle, because in the end, when you are here, when you are in the room and you talk with the other young students or not young, or adults and everything, the obstacle is not so big. Maybe it's an obstacle of a view, but we can talk about that. The real problem is the participation and the participation, only the participation, and how the students are active about this type of team, about this type of moment.
Yeah. So you think one of the key issues is how to activate more young people in interfaith dialogue and activities, and I understand from you that for you personally and for other participants it was a useful experience, and that's something we could try to promote on a larger scale, for example, not only in universities but also reaching high schools, so younger students. So thank you very much, Alessandro, for sharing your views and your experience. Please stay with us, because we might have some further questions through the chat that will come to after we've heard from the next speakers. Okay, thank you, Alessandro. So with this, I suggest we move on. Yes, thank you. So I suggest we move on to hear from Spain. Spain is another country where the TandEM project implemented the interfaith dialogues, and we're going to hear from Inés Mazarrasa Steinkuhler, who is the director for the Fundación Pluralismo y Convivencia. Inés, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Let me put
Very well.
On. Hi, hello.
We can also hear you too. Good. Now we can see you as well. Very good.
Okay, let me see if I can share my screen so you can see. I've just prepared a small presentation on.
Excellent.
Let me see where it is. Here. Is it? Can you see anything? No. Okay. There you go.
Yes, it's loading. Yes.
Yes.
Perhaps before we go to the presentation, could you tell us what is Fundación Pluralismo y Convivencia?
Yeah, it's actually one of the purpose of the presentation. That was
great.
More or less a little introduction of what we are and why are we involved in the TandEM project. So basically,
excellent. I let you go ahead.
Yeah, so Fundación Pluralismo y Convivencia, it's a public entity. It was created in 2004 by the Ministry of Justice, And it was created as a result of the recognition of profound changes in our society. Can you see it or can you hear me? Yes, right?
Yes,
Hello?
we can hear you
Okay.
and we can see the slides.
Okay, perfect. So I was just saying that the idea of creating this public entity was the result of the recognition that Spain had changed, that the same way that Europe has changed in the last years in terms of being more secular society, but at the same time more diverse in the range of beliefs and denominations that are present in our societies. So that's what the main reason that for the creation of the Fundación, and the main purpose of it is to encourage the recognition of this diversity and also to encourage the accommodation into public policies of this religious diversity as a basic element to guarantee the freedom of religion that is recognized in the Human Rights Declaration, the fundamental rights of the EU, etc. So we work basically to get four objectives. First, to contribute to institutional strengthening of the religious denominations and entities, to improve public management of religious diversity, and to help building an informed public opinion that is tolerant with religious plurality. And also, we encourage the participation of other actors that can be relevant to make sure that this diversity it's more and more part of how we conceive our country and our societies at large. So how do we work? I'm going to skip this because I think you're more interested in knowing how did we get involved in the TandEM, but just very briefly. So we basically work around three main areas. One is with the work with the denomination, the different minority, what so-called minority denominations present in Spain. And we do so by having a very close interactions with them, and particular with those who have signed an agreement with the state, which is basically Islam, Judaism, and Protestantism. But we also work and have a very close dialogue with all the others, other religious entities that are present here, and they are involved a wide range of beliefs, going from Buddhism, Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, Hinduism, etc. Very long list. We do have, because it was one of the objectives when the foundation was created, one of the goals was to strengthen the capacity of these denominations to have a dialogue and a productive interaction with the administration and the public authorities. So we have funding facilities for some of these religions, not all of them, some of these denominations, to build their institutional and capacity of the representative bodies, and also to encourage the participation of these local communities, religious entities, in the social processes in their communities. A second line of work, which is basically one of our main and most important, I would say, area of work, is the public management of religious diversity. And this is because while preserving the non-confessional character of the state, and although it's true the religion is somehow a private issue, it does have a public manifestation. And in that sense, it is important to have a good management and a good public policies that integrate this diversity and also offer public services that take into account this reality. So we work with public administration at different levels, so being national or subnational levels. We provide resources to manage, so we can provide some specific tools for management, and we provide guidance and manuals to make sure that legal, social, and institutional recognition is achieved, basically. And to this end, we have two main instruments, which we're very proud of, is the Observatory of Religious Pluralism in Spain, which basically collects all the information related to different aspects. We have, for example, we've conducted research in all the 17 regions in Spain where we have a map of the diversity for every region. We have a directory of places of worship, which is basically a proxy indicator of the diversity that we have, since we don't have a census of members of the confessions, but we do have a registry, let's say, about the places of worship that we update on a regular basis. And we do have also an advisory service for the public administration. We work with different municipalities and different regions in that sense. And then the third line of work is with the society at large, because we believe it is the space where public opinion and the social cohesion is at play. And then we have, therefore, we have a very active role in raising awareness and participating in projects that promote tolerance and counter hate speech and discrimination on grounds of religion. And in that sense, we have a call for proposals on an annual basis to involve civil society, academics, universities, public administration to conduct this sort of programs. And we do have also our own projects. And this here, I want to highlight one of our projects that we are doing right now, which is what we call Cambia el Marco, which is literally change your mindset or change your frame. And it is very relevant for the TandEM as well, because it's with young people. We're trying to understand and think together on what does it mean to be a religious person, a religious young person in a society like ours right now, where there is more difficulty to participate, as the previous participant was saying, where the society is more and more secular, etc. So how these young people perceive what it is to be a religious person nowadays. And in that, within this work with society at large is where we participated in the TandEM project with IOM Spain here. Our involvement was basically to make sure that there was a session on interreligious dialogue. And as you see, we're not so much on interreligious dialogue, we work on the public management of diversity, which means, of course, we encourage the different denominations to speak to each other, to share experiences, etc. But our mission is fundamentally to make sure that the relationship within society and with the public administration is a healthy one and a productive one. And then, well, I'm not sure I want to go through this because I'm not sure we have enough time, but basically we're reaching our 15 years of existence. We're still young, but we have done quite a good amount of achievements, I believe, and some of them are listed here. But basically what I would like to highlight here is that what was something that was almost an idea 15 years ago, that diversity of religions would become something relevant and in our society, has been proven to be right, and that our institution is now in a position to make sure that we provide specific answers to emerging needs in that sense. We have a better understanding of the presence of the different beliefs and denomination, and a better, I would say, a better understanding that this is part of the diversity landscape in Spain and in Europe in general. We have promoted a framework for dialogue and tolerance in the frame or following a human rights and fundamental freedoms approach. We have promoted academic research and specialized knowledge generation and dissemination through the observatory. And we have put in the agenda the importance of municipal management of religious diversity, because it is at municipal level where the citizens exercise their rights, basically. And this is where we have put all our attention, and we will continue to do so in the future. So some of the challenges that we see is that, of course, at least in Spain, I'm not sure about the rest of Europe, but I guess it is similar for most of the southern European countries, the diversity of religions, although it has been present historically, it has been accelerated in the last years through immigration. But the reality is also that we have to shift from an immigration perspective to a citizenship one, where the sense of belonging has to be strengthened. And I think showing and integrating the diversity of religion, which is an essential part of the identity of any of us, whether believer or not, has to be reinforced. And I think that's why there is a key role for public management of this diversity. We also want to focus on promoting alternative narratives, because we realize, and more so with the issue of social media, etc., that it's not worth it or is not worth it. There are studies that say that going counter narrative, it may be not the way, that it's better just to try to find alternative ones and work with in building collective imaginaries that are a little bit different. That's why we want to work with, and we do work with youth, and we work through education also, because we believe educating on democratic and human rights values are the key, and are key to advance in this area. And we also want to become, and I think that's one of the challenges that we all face, is that the data that are basically produced and disseminated sometimes are not very reliable, and we want to make sure that whatever information is information is produced and where decisions are made on this information are based on reliable data. And this is where we want to focus for the future as well. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this interesting presentation, Inés. It's fantastic to hear about the foundation is 15 years is still young. I think there's already a lot of experience built up there, and I really enjoyed, hearing this presentation. Now, I have a few questions that came up. You mentioned that actually, as part of the foundation, you also established this observatory of religious pluralism, and that under this observatory you conduct also research to have a better understanding, to have more data available. Could you give some examples of that kind of research, the kind of reports that you've produced?
Well, for example, right now research has been one of our key activities since the foundation was created, because basically there was very little information. So the first thing that was done was to make this mapping of all the regions in Spain, to know what are the different religions that are present besides Christian Catholics, that we know they're there and everything, but and to know a little bit the scale and the size and everything. So we have a collection we have 17 regions in Spain. So for all of these regions, for each one, I think we have 16 completed. We have a map of all the research, but we also have research. We have, let's say, promoted research at university level. So we have a network of professors at in different universities throughout the country, and they have different fields of research. That maybe one of the things that we're pushing now is to know a little bit more about religious diversity at the workplace. Because we believe a lot of people who are now at the university, who are having degrees and will access the labor market in the future, how this diversity is integrated in the labor market. That's one of in the workplace. That's one of the things that I think we're going to see very near. And actually, it is already there in some of the European courts, and we see more and more of these cases going to court. So I think we have to be a little bit before going to court, trying to integrate this diversity. So it's one of the research that we're trying to promote. There's very little done so far, at least in Spain, and we're trying to also be connected with other institutions, but that's one of the examples. The other one is, as I was saying, in terms of the places of worship. That's more than a research. It's what we see as the indicator, the most reliable indicator of the diversity in Spain. Because as I would say, there's no census on the number of followers of different religions, and this is like a proxy indicator that we can use and see. And it's very interesting to see how it has been evolving throughout the years.
Okay, sounds very interesting, and especially what you mentioned about religious diversity at the workplace. It's true that it's a topic we haven't thought about yet, but definitely something that should be explored much further. You also mentioned this idea of promoting alternative narratives, which is also something we are working on under TandEM, and you talked there about building collective imaginaries. Could you tell us what you mean with that, and how does that work?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a right translation actually, but what we mean is that what I mean by that is that I think one of the challenges so far is it's social advocacy in terms of really conceiving ourselves as a society as a plural one, as a diverse one. You know, believing that diversity is part of our identity. And I think for a very long time, or still nowadays, I think we don't see ourselves. You would ask, I'm sure, I mean, and we haven't done that, but I think that would be an interesting survey to conduct, to see how, if you ask around in the street, how do you see your society? Do you think it's a religiously plural or not? I'm not sure the answer will be that yes. I think people will still conceive either it's a Christian Catholic in the case of Spain, rather than seeing that it's more a secular one with a diversity of religions for those who believe. And I think that's one of the challenges, that regardless also of what you believe or not believe, this is a fundamental right that has to be preserved. So speaking about religion is not speaking about something private, it's speaking about how do we understand our society. And our society is plural, and it's diverse in the many identities that we have around us. That's what we're trying. And when we speak about not going through the counter narratives, and unfortunately, I think in Europe we're seeing the rising of hate speech and discrimination on the grounds of religions. I think the answer is, personally, I mean, it's not so much about countering that discourse, but also trying to build alternative discourses and alternative situations, basically.
Okay. Thank you very much for your contribution, Inés. To the other participants, if you have any questions, please do use the chat. When we've heard from all the speakers, we will look at those questions. So, Inés, please stay with us a little longer to perhaps answer any other questions that might come in. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, I suggest we move on now to Malta. And from Malta, we have Dr. François Mifsud of the University of Malta, Faculty of Education. Dr. Mifsud, can you hear us?
I can hear you, but I don't know if you can hear me. Hello?
I can hear you very well. Yes.
Oh, wonderful.
I can
Great.
hear you.
How are you doing?
We can't see you. Now we can see you as well.
Great,
yes.
Wonderful.
I see a lot of books behind you. You must read a lot.
Yes. That's just to impress, to look good.
Good. So can you tell us a bit more about Interfaith Dialogue in Malta?
So, as many people might know, Malta is mainly, one can say, a predominant Catholic country. That doesn't mean it's exclusively Catholic, and that doesn't mean also that the people who are Catholic tend to practice their kind of beliefs or tend to associate themselves with the Catholic Church. Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, I hear you very well.
So suddenly went blank, that's the reason. But the presence of people who belong to other faiths has been in Malta, one can say, almost constantly present. Historically, at least we can go far a lot, especially the presence of Islam, the presence of Judaism, which was always a presence that has been a little bit of, at a point it was very strong, but then there was a situation of an expulsion, historical expulsion, something similar to Spain in a way, not that radical. And the presence of other faiths, especially through the period of colonization of the British, was also present through the Indian community and other communities around Europe. Then also there is a diverse presence when it comes to Christianity. There are also different kind of denominational presence. One can go with the Orthodox Church, with the Greek Orthodox Church, Anglican community, Protestants, and so forth. Geographically, we are situated at the heart of the Mediterranean, and that makes Malta also quite an important, in a way, multi-faith presence, because there are people who pass through Malta. They don't stay in Malta, but in a way they pass obviously with their own package and with all their own faith experience. Now the situation when it comes to diversity regarding faith has in a way increased or intensified due to the fact that for the past 25 years, Malta has been also a protagonist in welcoming migrant communities who are living in Malta. There are different kind of migrant communities coming from different areas of the world, and obviously they bring their own faith tradition with them. Malta has a very high migrant population, and it's increasing. So that makes obviously Malta quite an interesting place, almost like an interesting sample where one can study the dynamics of faith, dialogue, and other traditions. Hello.
Yes, we can hear you very well. Thank you for this background. So you are telling us that religious diversity has become more important in Malta since we've seen an increase of more migrant communities.
Yes.
Does that lead to any issues in your view, or?
Wherever there is diversity, there is always issues because people don't take diversity always as a positive way. There is always that tendency that one engages with diversity as in a form of exclusion, aggression, or stuff like that. So there is that aspect which is also present, and it does not only regard faith tradition, but other forms of diversities, gender, culture, ethnicities, and stuff like that. One of our jobs is also to try to engage with, especially the job of my department, is to engage with religious diversity and other diversity, but in my case it's more religious and cultural, as a learning experience. First and foremost, it is our principle that an education institution cannot educate if you don't welcome the all of the person, of the individual. We cannot just welcome part of the individual and tell him leave the rest as something personal or private. One of our jobs as educators, and since I work in the faculty of education, is to see that when we welcome students at the university, but also in other institutions, we see that we welcome them in their whole package, in their whole reality, and not partially. Because in my opinion, and in the opinion of many other people and many other academics, if we don't welcome the faith or origin of our students, we are practically not engaging with them educationally. We are engaging partially with them, and I think that is not educational, and that is actually doing a disservice. There are different challenges that comes with that. One of them is visibility. Obviously, if you want to engage with diversity, you need to see it. You need to sense it around you. So one of the challenges that education institutions have is to make diversity visible, especially when it comes to diversity of religions. And this reflects also the different secular ideology that one kind of belongs to. There is the secular ideology which is based on a religious concept but there's also another secular ideology which is practically based on diversity. That I always explain it like when it comes to, it's always an interpretation. What does it mean a public space or an educational space? For some people, it means an a-religious space. In my opinion, that is wrong, because in especially educational places and the democratic space needs diversity and needs to see the faces, the whole face of the individuals in our community. So for me, as a public space or an educational space means mainly a space of diversity, a space where diversity is expressed and a space where diversity is included. Why I'm saying that? Because not all diversity is included in this space, because a diversity that comes from a background of hate speech or a background of intolerance or exclusion, that is obviously doesn't have a space of that, because that would contradict all these projects. But the first challenge that I see, a very strong challenge, is visibility. How to make diversity visible in all its forms. The second challenge I see, and I'm using numbers just for the sake of clarification. There's no such an order here. The second challenge I see is how to sustain diversity, how to maintain diversity. I think it's a disservice, especially in university institutions, when we say welcome diversity, but we don't provide spaces, we don't provide facilities where people from different backgrounds are welcomed, including food. Okay, so I cannot say I welcome a Muslim student if I don't provide a halal food, or I welcome a Jewish student if I don't provide, especially if the Jewish is, is religious, if I don't provide kosher food. So, or even assistance like chaplaincies and stuff like that. So the other challenge, which I find it's a huge challenge of education institution, but at the same time we need to do it, we need to engage with it, is to maintain diversity, is to provide for our diverse communities to live and sustain and maintain their diversity. The third, I think, challenge is also with the term religion. We know that the term religion is not an old term. It has been adapted from anthropology practically. We know that, for example, in medieval times, religion meant something else. At a point we find in medieval literature, religion means a virtue practically. You find it in Aquinas or other philosophers. So we have to be careful with this term, because for some people this term comes almost like with a whole one agenda. It doesn't come like that. There is diversity within religions. There is diversity of individuals within religions. There are different kind of segments of diversity that comes together. Like you don't have a Muslim or a Christian person, but you have a Christian, for example, who is gay, a Christian who has certain ideology. So everyone comes within a diverse package within the diverse community. So this is maybe the other challenge, but I think it's an important challenge that we have to sustain, is what I call complexification. Okay, and I think education institutions need from early years to educate our students in learning to see things in a complex way. Things are not black and white. To be a Muslim doesn't mean it comes with one formula. There are different ways of being a Muslim. To be a Christian doesn't come with one formula. To be a Jewish doesn't come, and all the other faiths, Hindu, whatever. So I think the term religion, we have to be careful how we use it, because sometimes it has been used or misused in a way to box people in them. And I think education institutions have a responsibility towards engaging with people and their faith, but also with their particularity of living their faith. I consider myself Catholic. I consider myself Christian, but I do see myself different sometimes from other Christians, and maybe I see myself more closer to other faith communities in certain areas or certain ideologies. So one has to engage also within these diversities. What do I mean by complexification? Complexification practically means that we see the human being not just as a simple formula. The human person is made up of different realities, different stories, histories, and we need to engage with that, with all of that. It doesn't mean we'll know it all. There is always more to do and more to know. And that's maybe the other aspect, which I think religions bring. Although religions usually gives you that sense of tradition, of looking backwards, or history, but in reality, religions also, the diversity of religions, where it comes together, it shows us kind of how that we need to know more, that there is more to go, there is more to do.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Mifsud. I see that you really pointed nicely to the different issues. I have actually never reflected on this term, religion. It's good that you remind us that, you know, we have to be careful also with using such term to make sure we don't, you know, box people. So thank you for raising that.
One has to keep in mind that there are people that they can't, that there are religions themselves, that they don't associate themselves with the term religion. One has also to keep in mind the negative history of that term. It came with a package of colonization. Okay, it came up with a package that we went out there to box people in them and kind of to give them a definition. It's an ugly history, but unfortunately it's still present with us. So we have to be humble enough also to be careful the way we use the term. Even the idea of interreligious dialogue. I am all for interfaith and interreligious dialogue, but I do recognize that one has to be careful not to put any limits on this dialogue. And not to expect that dialogue means with this kind of formula, the other kind of formula. Yes. So, so yes, this is a concern for me.
Yeah. Now you mentioned that as, you know, an academic institution, you would like to welcome the whole of the person, including the faith of that person, and to make this diversity visible. Now this a bit reminded me of debates that have been going on for years in different countries in Europe regarding, is it, for example, for students to wear the veil or not? How do you look at such debates?
I think as a university, as an academic, and as an educator myself, I need to know my students to engage with them. I am not there to deliver kind of lectures in an almost like passive way. Education means you're encountering another face and you learn from the other as the other learns from you. So there is this constant transformative encounter. This encounter cannot happen if the other or myself is not showing his or her true face. So putting these regulations and all these kind of perimeters on what to express yourself in a public arena, obviously it works against education. I think it goes against the intrinsic reality of being a university, of being an academic institution. I think it's not only doing a disservice to the student as an individual, but it's doing a disservice to academia. It's doing a disservice to our academic, to our research, to our educational efforts and everything. So yes, when one does not welcome the diversity of customs, diversity of traditions, and obviously by welcoming, it doesn't mean you accept everything, because obviously in the act of welcome, there's a debate going on, there's a dialogue going on. But one cannot learn if they are showing another persona that is not themselves. Because obviously it all depends how one understands education. If for some people education means just an academic effort, you know, that you practically inhale information and that's it, that's obviously very limiting understanding of academia. But for us, academia is much more than that. It's our life, it's research, it's changing, it's transformative and stuff like that. So yeah, it depends how deep you want to go. If you want to be superficial, I would say, I'm going to be very radical about it. If academics want to be superficial, or education institutions wants to be superficial, they should adapt these kind of format of a very narrow understanding of kind of public space, where public space is a-religious. But if you want to go deep and transformative and explorative, then obviously you have to be more engaging with the whole person and the whole ideology and faith tradition of the individuals.
Thank you. Now I have a last question, because Alessandro, who participated as a student, the interfaith dialogue, he suggested that, you know, it could be very useful to also do this with, for example, high schools or secondary schools.
Yes.
Now, since you're working for the Department of Education, yes, yes. How do you see that? And as you're preparing, let's say, future teachers, how could they bring this in the classroom?
Yeah, not only if you, obviously. So I do think that at the moment there is, especially, I find it a lot in Western Europe, this kind of almost a-religious feeling, you know, running away or don't want to hear about religion or avoiding any religious discourse. I do think that when we do that, we are doing a disservice to a more multicultural and democratic setting that we live in. It's very important, it's pivotal for the future of democracy of our countries, for the future of multicultural and diverse and inclusive kind of society, that we engage with religions, and religions in plural, obviously. So one thing that we are exploring at the moment, my faculty, with the collaboration of other people, is what we call IRE, Inclusive Religious Education. That is to formulate a curriculum for schools from primary to secondary that engages all the classroom. At the moment, there is a sad situation in Malta where, for example, for mathematics, all the students stay together in the class. For English, they stay together in the class, and for other subjects, they stay together in the class. But the moment there is religious education, some students leave the classroom and go to separate classrooms. At the moment, they do ethics, and because unfortunately the religious education that the Maltese curriculum imparts is mainly based on Christian Catholic kind of format. So obviously people, either secular people or people who have different ideologies or maybe different faiths, sometimes don't feel comfortable by that, and then they go to ethics. But then there are some people who don't even feel comfortable with that, and they don't do anything. So what we're saying, I think it's unacceptable for a country, for a civilized society, to have people finishing school, 16 years old, 8 years old, and not having any basics, what we call religious literacy. Like they don't know about Muhammad, who's Muhammad. They don't know about what's a mosque, what's a synagogue, what's a temple, what's Buddhism. And that is very limiting, especially in a reality which is becoming always more globalized. People are traveling all the time. Like imagine if you go to Italy and you have no clue of Christianity or Catholicism, how would you engage with the Italian culture? How would you, even if you don't believe or you're an atheist, whatever, but you won't have the tools to engage with that context, because contexts have a history. Or going to Morocco without knowing anything about Islam. It's almost impossible to really engage with the culture and with the context. So one of the problems we are seeing nowadays is that we have lots of people, especially from a Western background, who are religiously illiterate. They don't really have any background whatsoever of religions. And that obviously can cause a problem when it comes to their future, to traveling, but even to working. You know, in case of a Maltese, if you're working in an office, you might have colleagues who come from different faiths. You might have clients who come from different faiths. And you don't need to work directly on religious issues to do that. And you know, and the more knowledge you have about religions, you are facilitating your life and the life of others to live more in harmony and maybe also to learn from each other.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a very interesting concept, this inclusive religious education. I definitely hope this will take off, because I agree with you, and
Yes.
For a fact, my own children in school for their religious class, they're split into different groups according to religion. But as you said, I mean, maybe there's more merit in engaging all of them together than entire classroom. Exactly. And precisely, you know, promoting this dialogue and understanding of each other's religion. So thank you so much for sharing.
May I just add something? May I just add something small, very small? I think if we, from a very young age, if we're telling our students, our young people, that you can stay together in mathematics class, you can stay together in English class, on other subjects, but we cannot stay together in religion, I think obviously there's something wrong. And that can be a message that they will carry out with them throughout their life. And I think it's not the truth. It's not helping us at all. And we definitely need to make an effort where people come together with all their diversity and maintaining their diversity, respecting each other's diversity, but at the same time, dialogue with each other. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for this. Perhaps we can now look at the chat and see if there were any outstanding questions. Okay, we will start with a question from Rabat. What are the key challenges you encounter in your respective experiences in interfaith dialogue? What methodologies do you have used to overcome them? And then a second part, she would like to know what is or has been the role of the parents in initiatives to promote interfaith dialogue, because it would be important to target them as well, especially among young students. The question directed to all speakers, and I'll move on to read the next question, which is particularly to Spain and Malta. Is the popular collective perception regarding the historical presence of populations practicing various religions nowadays reshaped? And if yes, to which direction? How is perception influencing interfaith dialogue? So perhaps for the first question, we can go back to one of our first speakers. Imam Yahya, would you like to answer that question? Are you still with us? Hello? Yeah, I'm not sure if Imam Yahya is still with us, so maybe I move on to the other speakers because there was a question particularly targeting Spain and Malta. So Inés, would you like to give it a go?
Hi. Yes. Hi.
Okay, Inés is still there. Excellent.
Yes, I'm still here. So this sort of, well, that's exactly what we're trying. I mean, what we want to work on. I mean, there is. I think there is a perception that the range of different religions has increased, because also in the last 15-20 years there has been a wave of immigration in Spain, and therefore although Islam and Judaism and Protestantism was present in Spain for a few centuries, the reality is that it has increased, and the diversity has increased in the last years. And I think there is a collective perception that this has increased, that has happened. Now, the challenge here is not only to observe the diversity, but rather to embrace diversity as something that enriches us, that it's a value that we have to not only accept, but to see as something that is better for us, that is part of our society, that is part of the that enriches us. That I think is still a challenge, and it is a challenge because it's still, I guess, recent. It's still, I think there's a lot of what Professor Mifsud was mentioning about a lot of inertia in society of how we conceive ourselves. And I think that has to be worked a little bit more. But definitely there has been a change because it's very visible somehow. So yes, I would say there has been a change in perception in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Mifsud, perhaps
Yes,
you could also touch upon this question of engaging the parents.
Yeah, of engaging the parents. That's a dangerous question, actually. Because one of the jobs of a teacher sometimes is also to go against the parents. And that is a delicate situation, which we as educators find ourselves in it all the time, unfortunately. So part of our training is to assist our teachers also in challenging the students, especially the beliefs that they bring them from their homes. You know, unfortunately, you might have students who come from families who are racist or who are xenophobic and stuff like that, and which is a real challenge. I'm sure my Spanish colleague would agree with me, because these are realities that we face all the time. Unlike other places in Europe, Malta happened to be Mediterranean, and migrant they practically come into our country. They find themselves into our country, not by being processed, like mainly in inland Europe, where migrants have been passing through a whole different process and stuff like that. While in our case, it's a total different situation. It's a very similar situation to Italy, to Spain, to Greece. So practically, Malta, many migrants come to Malta just as a first land, as an entrance, as a key for them to enter Europe. And that creates lots of challenges, obviously. And unfortunately, many people express themselves very vocally, sometimes racially, xenophobic and stuff like that. So one of our jobs is actually to assist our educators to teach the students also to question their beliefs of origin, especially when it comes to beliefs that are not healthy, that might hinder this kind of inclusivity, diversity, and democracy. So that is also a job. On the other hand, it is also part of our job to engage with the families. A student is not in a vacuum. A student has a setting, has a construct, has a community behind him, a context. So you cannot engage with the student, especially when they are younger, if you're not engaging with their families and their families' traditions. So it is part also of our job to engage. And we engage not only to teach, because we have to be careful here. We don't engage with the families to teach. We engage also with the families to learn from them, because many families also bring some interesting challenges to the educator, and to open ourselves and to engage with more diversity. So it is a little bit of, it is a very delicate kind of discussion. One can go with the direction of saying practically, welcome everyone, welcome the parents' ideas and stuff like that. No, in a dialogue, you welcome, but you also question. On the other hand, you cannot exclude the presence of the parents, because the parents are vital in the education of their children, of their offspring. So that is also another aspect, another component. I think how one would ask, how can you create an inclusive environment? I think by making diversity visible in itself, that's a very strong starting point. Okay, when you are teaching students that diversity is okay, there's nothing to panic about. Embrace it, question it, but it's fine. It's what we are. Okay, not everyone have a mother and a father. There are people who have a single parent. There are people who have two fathers. There are people who have two mothers. It's always diverse. So I think that in itself is already educational. So I do, with the last question that I'm reading, I do see that education, schools are carrying the biggest kind of responsibility when it comes to the inclusion aspect of multi-faith settings. Schools definitely have the key, but at the same time, schools have the responsibility, but also the challenge to reply to this. Just keep in mind that when our children learn about their faith, they learn in their communities. When children learn about other faiths, they would need to go out from their communities and to engage in a more public fora, that is the school community. If we don't do that, there is a danger that the only time that our students will learn about other people's faiths is within their community. And that means, obviously, they are learning from their own perspective. They are learning also maybe prejudice. So it is the responsibility of the school to balance these things, this situation up, and also to engage with diversity. I think this is my prediction for the future. The future holds more responsibility for schools. Definitely more responsibility for schools.
Thank you, Dr. Mifsud. I think we could continue this discussion for very long because it's a very interesting topic, but I see that the time of our webinar, unfortunately, is up. Yeah. Yes, Inés, please go ahead, Inés.
I would just like to add something. I think, I'm not sure we have stressed that enough during the conversation today, is that what we're speaking about is a fundamental right, which has one of the highest protections in our fundamental rights charter in Europe. It's part of the human rights, and we should not forget that, because we're not talking about something that we're just open to. It's just something that we have an obligation to make sure that there's a full exercise of the rights, and the only limit to it is public order and the freedom of others. But that's the only limit for that freedom of religion, and I think it is important to stress it, because we tend to forget, and in that sense, I also think it is important not only to promote interfaith dialogue, but also more broadly to speak with people who do not believe, because freedom of religion does include people who don't have any religion. And so it is, of course, important to have interfaith dialogue, but it is also, and I think Professor Mifsud is also in that line, to open that discussion to the society in general. Education is a very important entry point, but in general, I think this has to be broadened to other aspects of life. That's my only conclusion, basically.
I think that was very important indeed to highlight that before we conclude, that freedom of religion is a fundamental right. So I think that should also set the parameters of how we engage. And what I learned throughout this webinar is that it's important to listen, it's important to understand, but we should also go this one step further and really embrace religious diversity if we want to come to inclusion in schools, in the workplace, and in the society as a whole. So thank you very much to all the speakers. It was extremely interesting, and I'm sure the other participants enjoyed it as much as I did. Now, before we conclude, just to let everyone know that we will have one last webinar on the 18th of November under TandEM, looking at setting up student mentorship schemes. So mentorship schemes where students can actually support other students with a migrant or refugee background, and we're going to hear about this experience under TandEM. So once again, participants, the next webinar, and with that we wish you a very nice of course, hope that all of you will take this idea of interfaith dialogue, freedom of religion, and how to promote this in a real inclusive way, how to embrace this, that we can take this further in the work we do in all our countries and organizations. Thank you so much, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.